humans, Craelan here. Before we get started with this, I just want to thank everyone who's watched part of that Arthur's Nightmare video. That's a really delightful and surprising result. I thought it would get a few more views than my average video, but I was thinking like 20, not literally 10 times more. Or now it's over that 285. How awesome! So again, thanks to everyone who's participated in that. With this video, I'm going to be starting something a little different. I'm going to be doing a set of presentations probably once a week, and it's going to be things gamers are sick of hearing, and the series, as you can tell by this slide. So what this series is going to be about are things, or conceptions about video games and gamers in general that aren't true, but kind of some points to refute them. There'll be some research, but mostly it's going to be my observations about gamers in general and what video games have to offer in response to those misconceptions. So maybe if you're a student at a university and want to actually take an idea from this for a study, maybe a sociological or psychological study, feel free. I am more than happy to have given you that little seed of inspiration. So for today, we're going to be going with something that really kind of grates against me, the line, video games are a waste of time. And before we kind of unpack that statement and what that means, I just want to say a couple things about the people who believe this, because they seem to fall into a few categories. The first are they're just usually dismissive. So most people who say this to you are people who do not value you as a person. They're not close enough to really care about your hobbies or your passions. And so because it's something they're not interested in, then obviously it's a waste of time because their interests are superior. They don't waste their time, and they're putting kind of a moral argument onto you for, everyone has a limited amount of time. Why are you wasting yours? And it's just kind of a superiority thing, I think. I think for a long time, video games were that weird hobby, and people didn't really get it. And I don't know. People say, usually the dismissive, the people who say this statement out of dismissiveness, like I said, they don't know you well enough to be an important person in your life. So just move on past them. The people that do care about you but have still determined this have usually made an uninformed decision. They go with stereotypes about games, that they're all about violence, that they have nothing to offer in any constructive way. So these are people that you usually can talk to about the statement about why it's false. And lastly, there's going to be people that just don't get it. There's people in that regards to every hobby, every thing that humans do. There'll be people that just don't get it. So, again, this is another group that you just are like, no sweat, no worries, it's alright. As long as the key thing for each of these groups is, even if they never come around, even if they never understand how awesome video games are and how exciting they are, and just what a great opportunity they present to the world, as long as they don't invalidate your interest or validate you as a human being, then they can hold that view. I just take real issue with people who consistently use that as a put down for something you're passionate about, you enjoy, and something that often makes people a better person for pursuing. So now that we've covered that, went backwards, haha. We'll go to old art. So part of why I think the video games are a waste of time statement has persisted so successfully is because video games are a form of art. And my argument for this is that for old art, there is a point in which everything culminated, where there was a style of art that combined everything. It combined music, it combined dancing, it combined acting, it combined, the set building, and for artists to participate in that, and that was opera. So this has actually happened once before in the history of art, that there's been something that culminated everything. Uh, so that's already happened, and um, now opera is seen as a sophisticated thing that you go to, and you're dressed up. It's formal event. When it first came out, it was a thing for the masses. It was rowdy. People went to participate. Throwing tomatoes if the performance was bad was not uncommon. And that's definitely more of Shakespearean plays, but still, it was something that was kind of for the common person. Um, Obviously, the better seats were for the elite, but that's a different thing. So, and I also put old art in front of this because uh, opera was the culmination of several art forms that had persisted for thousands of years, if not centuries, if not thousands of years at that point. So video games are new art. So they combine all of the things that opera combined, but they also combine programming and technology. So they're well, opera required a huge team to create and put up a production for opera. Video games are the same way. They just incorporate those two new avenues. And technology, I think, is another part that plays into the why video games are less important, because we put an emphasis on why technology is bad, why people are addicted to technology, so that means video games are bad. I think that's kind of the subconscious thing. But also the reason it's important to appreciate video games as an art, and how that feeds into the video games are a waste of time mindset, is because art is a waste of time. You're not going to be able to eat a painting or use a piece of music to provide for your basic needs. That's very famously a failure of art. However, art is supposed to, the arts are supposed to speak to what makes us human. And that's why it persists, because it's an expression of humanity and of just everything that being a human is about. So that's very important. It's also, sociologically speaking, a way that a society criticizes itself. So you can look back in several movements, and art was often used to criticize governments, criticize policies, and this is a critical way that art functions in society, but it's definitely more abstract than just being something that you can use for a basic need of survival. So that, combined with technology being an addictive thing, that's kind of a double-edged sword for video games that create this misconception that they are a waste of time. So video games are in their infancy. Like I mentioned, opera, which was the last major culmination of the arts that I'm aware of. It was a culmination of arts that had been around for thousands of years. Video games, this a quick Google search can tell you this. The first known video game was made in 1958, are what's credited as the first video game, and so that means video games just now are turning 60 years old. So people look to art. Some people are gonna be like, "Oh, you compared video games to opera. Opera's so much more sophisticated." Video games are 60 years old. Opera is centuries old right now. So if video games are not as rich of an art form yet, as in there's not as much depth, and things are still kind of pretty much in boxes, like the franchises we see, Call of Duty, Mario series, stuff like that. It's because video games haven't existed long enough to be broken down into multiple expressions, but we're starting to get there with indie games, and indie games are quite often, on some level, a very personal expression of the developer on some aspect of humanity. And like I mentioned before, video games are a culmination of art. Music, acting, obviously visual art, for the graphics, technology, programming. They're a culmination of these huge teams of people. So hundreds of people work on a AAA title, and then you pay $20 to $100 for it. It's a really good deal when you think about it. Just like an opera, you pay maybe $100 for like a set of 100 people who have been putting hundreds of hours of effort into it. So they're a culmination of a lot of things, most notably teamwork, and then, you know, the newest aspect of art, which is technology. Video games also require audience participation, and they require it in a different way than anything else. So now, if you go see a musical performance or something, there might be a part where you like sing along or clap hands, but mostly you are a passive spectator. You are engaged emotionally, but you still do not have any influence on actually what happens on stage, what happens in the book, what happens in the musical piece, what happens in the painting that's already created. You are not part of that. But what's amazing about games and games, and it's carried over into video games, the digital form of games, is that developers create a possibility space for their audience. And while there has to be a spectator on any art form in order for the art form to be appreciated and engaged with, the video game cannot exist without someone making meaningful decisions within this possibility space. So games are really a possibility space as opposed to something simple or simply defined as a painting, a book, a piece of like a sound, that piece of music that's a sound that lasts for 3 minutes. Video games can take hours to complete or a couple minutes, and sometimes that speed depends on the meaningful decisions you make. And meaningful in this case means you make a choice and you get a consequence, and that can change depending on if your choices change. You're still limited because the developer can't make it, because video games are an abstract of real life, and so you can't perfectly mimic real life in any game or piece of art, at least not yet. So the possibility space has its limits. It does end. But if you're not actively making choices and decisions and taking action within this space, then the video game doesn't exist. Video games are enjoyed can be enjoyed as a spectator thing. Just think of Let's Plays like this channel. But still, even that spectator aspect of it couldn't be enjoyed if there wasn't someone making those meaningful decisions. Video games also allow for empathy. So I have met lots of gamers, and I haven't really met someone who's passionate about games who didn't have a significant level of emotional intelligence, because it's really difficult to be in this possibility space and interacting with other characters in very human-like ways, in realistic ways, in terms of emotions, and not develop empathy. Because if you're in a horror game and you're being chased by a serial killer, it really emphasizes how awful it is to be to have someone just decide, your life is over and it's time to kill you, and I'm going to toy with you a bit. A lot of where we're headed in, there's a direction that's developing in games right now called serious games, and the people who say video games are a waste of time say, well, I've heard this statement, well, at least it's being put to a good cause, as if video games create empathy, creating better people by putting you in the shoes of another, putting you in different perspectives and having you act in accordance with those perspectives, regardless of if they match your own perspective or not. I say, oh well, serious games, that's a little different. It's not, because video games are also unique in that, like I mentioned just now, you are not given an option in many cases to act within you act within a certain perspective or not. So there are biographical games. I can't think of the name right now, but it's by Anthropy. She made a game about the process of transitioning from being a male to a female. I think that was the transition. And you don't get an option to not transition. You are locked into that perspective, and that creates empathy for what transitioning is like, for the story of transitioning for one transgendered person. So that creates empathy in a way that reading a story about a transgender individual wouldn't, because you actually have to act in accordance with the perspective. Serious games, they make a point to do that, in juxtaposition with commentating on societal issues. So, Papers, Please. You are in the position of someone who decides whether someone crosses a border or not to escape a totalitarian government. You can allow people through, make little mistakes, but it's at the cost to your own family. So you're not you understand what it's like to be a cog in the machine at that point. But it also is a broader commentary on dictatorships and what it's like to be in a totalitarian regime. So video games are just this great setup for empathy, whether they're serious or not. You're forced into it, and it heightens your emotional intelligence to play video games. And the longer you do that, the more empathy emotional intelligence you develop, I think, by default, just because you have to play in those perspectives. Another big thing about video games is they allow for cooperation within an artistic space. So when you play multiplayer games, you are experiencing an art form, making meaningful decisions with other players, and these perspectives that you're locked into, and heightening your emotional intelligence together. Anything that almost anything that forces you to work together for the good of a team can be beneficial for emotional intelligence. There's of course always going to be exceptions, but that also builds a real life skill of getting along with people. And most games have a randomness component. Like you can play PvP, player versus player. For those of you watching this who don't know, multiplayer situations with a group of people you know, but often you start out just being randomly assigned teams, and then you have to figure out how to communicate with these teams effectively that you might never play with again, and get along with people, learn to adapt quickly to different play styles. So that is just a huge benefit from video games that we have that I can't see why people think is a waste of time, because it's a real life skill you need, and you just become more agile at cooperating because of these tiny amounts of time you have to figure out how to build teamwork. Video games, finally, I think that's finally right. Oh no, almost finally. They allow for rich experiences. Again, this goes back to the empathy. This goes back to being placed in these perspectives you might never have experienced or thought about before, and not having a choice but to proceed along within that perspective. And with the non-player characters, the computer's characters, also known as NPCs, again, for those who are watching this outside of the gaming community, responding to you in accordance to that perspective you haven't been able to choose. They also allow for rich experiences because it gives you just this world of possibilities. I don't know what it's like to personally fly, but you can have superpowers where you fly, or you fly a plane. And it's just amazing that we can experience these abstract, fantastical worlds as never before, and still they express the core of what is to be human, that emotional connection. It's just amazing to me. So and you get to experience it often within the context of a multiplayer game, or just like gaming communities have threads upon threads trying to decipher meanings of a game. And it's just amazing that we have that opportunity to dialogue, to dissect stories together. And wow, I see the word allow, and now I'm like, did I spell it right? Maybe not. Sorry if I spelled it wrong. Okay, but yeah, I'm having that moment. I've seen the word too much. So they allow for rich experiences, and finally, they're an investment. So they're a huge investment of time on your part. They're an investment of money, and most people think that it's a waste to invest those things into them. But you get, as I said, the benefits are amazing. You get to develop your skills in teamwork. You get to experience rich storytelling and music and acting and just a really innovative way to use technology, and that builds empathy by putting you in perspectives you're unfamiliar with, and it's a very unique way to experience art. It's art as a possibility space for you to make meaningful decisions as opposed to being told what people think directly. Alright, and then finally, games are going to continue to grow and diversify. I expect we're going to find more and more personal games through indie developers and smaller teams creating more relevant things as opposed to just the same franchise things. Although the franchises I expect to always be there and always creating some great games as well. But I think as we continue to grow, we're going to see video games eventually reach a similar depth as music and art and acting have. I can only see it becoming a more complex and enriched world for video games. So some other things in regards to games being a waste of time are the developers themselves. Developers are, I think, in some ways more dedicated to their art form than others, because you have indie game developers for the most part creating these games without thinking that they're going to without ever looking toward a payout for them. They just want to create a piece of art that's going to be experienced. Most artists, they have to, and artists, musicians, actors, they don't get that opportunity because they can commit their life to acting for a payout, but they might not even get the opportunity to display their art to where it's seen. They might not get their opportunity to act in a play, and then they're cut off and they can't continue. But video game developers, they can post it anywhere, so that is an easier advantage, but it feeds into the next thing. They have to be patient. They had to be patient in a different way, while artists and musicians and actors wait for their big break to be noticed. Developers have to wait for that too, but the thing is, someone might play 2 minutes of their game, decide they're done, and never look back, and yet still leave a review of the entire thing, as if they have made an informed decision about that. Or it might, I remember one example for me personally is Golden Sun, a Game Boy Advance game. I had that game for 2 whole years and had put 20 or 30 hours into it. Hadn't even scratched the surface of the story because I was stuck. I was a very little kid at the time. So, and there's a lot of complex puzzles in there for a little kid to solve. But finally, I broke through a little bit of the deeper story, got excited, and then 100 hours later completed the game. And it was just such a rewarding thing. But, a developer gets the opportunity for someone to do that, for someone to wait 3 years or 2 years to finish their work and then actually experience, but they have to wait and for that to happen. They can put something out there and it might either never be experienced or might be experienced over a much longer period of time than, say, a movie or a theater production or a piece of music. Excuse me. So there's that. It's a different application of patience, but it's still, I think that's almost a more difficult place of patience because, as I said, indie developers, most of them aren't even looking to do this full-time or make money. They just wanted to put something out there for people to enjoy, and they might have to wait 3 or 4 years before it's even looked at. And then they're also creative, of course. I think that it could go without saying, but just putting into perspective again, there's hundreds of people working on these AAA titles, and we're getting them for a discount. There's like 1 or 2 people sometimes working on an indie game, and sometimes it's a much larger small team, like 20 people, but they're putting in hundreds of hours into this one thing. And if you're on an indie team, you have a lower budget, so you have to figure out creative workarounds to make something look as good as a AAA game, or you decide to be humorous and go the complete way and make things look like crap, but really awesome mechanics, and the crappy visuals are a commentary on how addicted we are to good graphics or whatever. So developers are creative. And then finally, this is the last segment. I know that I actually plan on this being a 5-minute video, and we're almost at 30 minutes. So if that tells you anything, I now know how to budget better for time in the future. We can look at gamers. What are gamers, and what can gamers do? Gamers are people that enjoy these possibility spaces, enjoy solving puzzles, and just these these challenging pieces of artwork that people think are a waste of time are not worthy of our time. And what we can do is advocate. We can discuss why video games are important to us, to the people who care about us, because again, most people that dismiss you they don't care about you, so they're not worth wasting your breath on. The small amount that just don't get it will still be like, be excited by your passion for video games, by your passion for the stories they tell and the possibilities they represent. For example, my sister does stuff with horses, and she'll come home all excited saying, "Oh, I cantered left today. Oh, I did this." I go into the anatomy of a horse, and I'm just like, well, that's great. Don't know what any of it means, but I'm excited because she's excited. I'm always happy to hear her talk about it because it's awesome. But think about how different that interaction would be if I was like, "Oh, riding horses is a waste of time. I don't know why you spend your time doing that." How awful would that be for her? And how awful would I be for doing that to her? But it's okay. But again, it seems to be more acceptable with video games since, art in some senses is a waste. But also has that technological aspect. Video games have the technological aspect, and technology has this negative moral implication to it. So you can advocate by talking about what you're passionate about, much like I'm doing in this video. You can share your experiences, share how you have met gamers. I know at PAX South when I went, I didn't actually meet anybody new because I'm quite the introvert, but just being in the environment and overhearing gamers say, "Oh no, you walk to your hotel with us, or you ride with us. You don't have to take an Uber in a strange city that you're not familiar with. We'll take care of you." Like, just seeing the friendships develop, and because we have this common love for gaming is amazing, and how deep these friendships can run. Because we're participating in this possibility space. It's a beautiful thing, and I know that some of my mindsets have been changed because I've been placed in perspectives that I was not familiar with. Like in Anthropy's game, and again, I apologize, I don't remember the name of it. I'll post it in the description. I'll do a quick Google search and post it in the description for that. So yeah, share your experiences. Again, it goes back to advocate by sharing. It's basically advocate by sharing your experiences and talk to other members of the gaming community about your love for games, because we need to build each other up, and it's always nice to not have to advocate, just to be like, "Yeah, that was a good game. I love that game," and someone would be like, "Yeah, I know, and this is a great game too." You learn about more. You learn more about other games. You learn more about each other. You can develop a bond, and again, it's great for everyone all around. And you can also share this video. Yeah, if you want someone else to do the advocating for you, feel free to share this video. I will always appreciate a like, comment, or subscribe on this video. And I don't mind taking the flack, taking the comments. Honestly, this is enough. This video is almost 30 minutes now, and I feel like it's enough of an explanation for this particular aspect that if I got a slew of negative comments on like, "Oh no, video games are a waste of time, oh, what about this," I'm probably just going to ignore it, because I've said almost everything I want to say, and any discussion I have would be with people in real life that I meet, because again, the people who you can advocate best to in this case are probably going to be people who care about you. So if you want to let me do the arguing for you, go ahead and share this video. I'll be happy to do it. And you can just, back it up with your own experiences. And finally, gamers everywhere can continue to be awesome, because I think gamers are pretty cool. There's always going to be some bad eggs in a crowd, but gamers seem to be, as I said, a little more emotionally intelligent than the average bear. And just thought of another connection on the empathy thing. Gamers of their own accord started creating events to raise money for charity by doing what they love to do, gaming. And you don't necessarily see that as much in the arts. Artists our musicians are more likely to wait to be called upon by a charity event for participation rather than go out and make their own events to support a charity. And yet gaming, only 60 years old, already has been doing that with its platform. So I think that's pretty awesome. And I think gamers in general are awesome. So everyone continue to be awesome. I think I said the word awesome enough. Well, that's all I have for this video. Up next is probably going to be the argument about video games causing violence. That should be a little bit shorter because it's not as broad of a topic, really. Plus, it's not as much of a soapbox for me as video games are a waste of time. And this really spawned because when I told someone I wanted to be a game developer and I have a real passion for like serious games because of my sociology major and just I think sociologically a lot of the time, they're like, well, that's at least not as much of a waste of time, basically. And it's just like, whatever. So that was several months ago, but again, this is definitely a personal, partly a personal issue to me that I've run across in video games being underappreciated. So, again, thanks for watching this. Thanks again for everyone who had that awesome response to the Author's Nightmare video. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Greetings also to our 2 new subscribers. I'm so excited. So, until next time, Craelan out.